Hello. In today's video, we will be setting up a set of two Pfsenses and we will form a carp cluster. So basically we have two virtual machines. Each virtual machine has three network interfaces. So one has a public IP, same on the second Pfsense. Then we have a shared interface. So both of them can talk to one another. So they know which one of them is the primary and which is the backup. And then we also have a local area network connected to it. We will be doing it on a OVH server. And to get started, basically I will be using one of my dedicated servers for this. I've already ordered a VRAC, which is for free. And then you have your servers and you can add your server to a VRAC. This allows you to get multiple servers with OVH in different data centers and connect them into a virtual network. Each physical server has two network interfaces. The first network interface will be used for the public IPs and the second one we'll be using for an internal network. So first, just install proxmox on it and you will get a login information and you can log into proxmox. I've already set up a small test virtual machine here. But then all we need to do to begin with is to configure our network. So we click on the node in question, then go to the network tab. And here I've already added a second bridge. So by default, OVH installs the first VM bridge, which is called VM bridge 0, and I added a second one. And for these, I picked the 172.16.11 range. So if I want to add further nodes into the cluster, I can just add them IP addresses in this range. And since the second network card is now connected to the VRAC, they can communicate to one another. If you also want to add more nodes to it, then you basically have to form a cluster. So you go in here, you go to cluster, and you create a cluster. I've already done that step as well because I plan on adding further servers to the cluster in the future. So basically, after you do the network configuration, you will have to restart this node, but then it comes back online and you have the interfaces available. So if I go into a shell and just type a ifconfig, you can see this is the interface that ships with OVH. And it's already configured to use the public IP address of the server. And now we also have that second interface which we can use for virtual machines, for example. The next step is to get a operating system, a ISO, to install. And you just download that into this folder. So I've already grabbed the last Pfsense release and unpacked it. So I now have an ISO. And basically, this is all I need to create a new virtual machine. So let's start by simply creating a Pfsense. I will call it Gateway. As a operating system, I am now selecting the Pfsense ISO. As a hard disk, you don't really need a lot of space. I will be picking like 10 gigabytes because I want to store some sort of logs and history of what's happening. 1 core is more than enough for me, and half a gig of RAM is also enough. Then we come to the network configuration. So for that, for the primary interface, which will be the public interface, I need a IP address. So in OVH, you can order so-called failover IP addresses. Like this one, they usually have the small flag which calls them a failover IP. Then you right click and click on add a virtual MAC. You enter a name and then it will generate a MAC address that matches the server. So for the primary, I will be using this IP address. So I will be copying the MAC address of that. You need to set a proper MAC address, else OVH isn't going to allow the communication from the server. And I'll simply be setting that MAC address, and then I click on confirm and create the virtual machine. So if we go to the hardware tab, we can see that it only created one network interface. But each of them needs three. One for the primary to talk to the internet, then one to talk to the other Pfsense, and the third one to talk to the local area network. So the primary is set, and we are going to add a second one. This time I'm going to use the second bridge, and I will be specifying a VLAN ID. I'm just going to pick 100 to begin with. So this will be for my local area network. MAC address I don't have to set any because it's a local IP. And as a model, I'm going to pick the para-virtualized video for drivers. That would be my second. And then I need a third interface to be able to talk to the other Pfsense. This will become my sync interface, and the sync interface has to be of the type Intel E1000. For this one, I will be setting the VLAN ID 200. And that should be pretty much it. Then the next step would be to simply start the virtual machine, head over to the console, and we will go through the installation. So when Pfsense is being installed, by default, it will configure the one interface, so the first primary interface, to get a address from DHCP, which wouldn't work for us here. So we will have to set a static IP to the failover IP. Okay, installation is done, and we can reboot into Pfsense. Okay, and now it's basically starting a small setup routine. It asks us if we want to set up VLANs. I will select no, because I'm doing the VLAN tagging already on proxmox level. Now we need to specify the WAN interface. So this is our VTNet 0. Then we need to specify the LAN interface, which is VTNet 1. And then we can specify the optional interface, which has a different naming convention because it's a different type. So that is called EM0. And we want to proceed. And now it will try to grab a new IP address by asking for a DHCP lease, but OVH doesn't use DHCP leases, so it will not get a response and basically be unconfigured. Okay, so as you can see, it didn't get any IP address, so we have to set one now manually. It is a little bit tricky because by default, the gateway is outside of the network of the IP address. So in this example, we have this 178.33.36.223. And this is the IP address of the hypervisor, so of the proxmox server. So the gateway of the failover IP would be the 3 first octets plus a 255 at the end. So basically, the first is the actual IP, and this would be the gateway. And this is outside of this range. So we have to use a little trick here to get that up and running. So first we have to add a route to tell Pfsense where to find the gateway. Minus link minus iface vtnet 0. So this basically means that a route to the IP address of our gateway always goes through the vtnet 0 interface. So now we should be able to ping that route. Oh no, I forgot to add the subnet mask, I guess. So let's remove that route again and add it again, and also specify a /32 subnet mask. Oh yes, yeah. Okay, now I understand. If we look at the interface, we now basically have a route set, but we don't have a internet address set yet. So now let's go to exit, and we assign an interface IP address. And we will be specifying it for the WAN interface. And we don't want it to be configured by DHCP, but we want to enter the IP address of the failover IP. Now we should specify the subnet mask, which is 32, but for now we can only enter 31, which will work. Then we need to specify a IP address for the LAN interface, which we are not going to do. And we are going to disable IP version 6. And we still want to use HTTPS for the login to the web configurator. If we now take a look at the interface again, we can see it now has a IP address set. If we take a look at the routes, we see that our route is still missing. So we are going to add it in one more time. The route basically disappeared after raising the interface. So I should have set the IP address first and then set the route. Now you can see the route, and now we should finally be able to ping the gateway. Okay, so basically we can ping the gateway, but if we were to ping the internet, it still doesn't work because it doesn't know how to reach the internet. And for that we simply set a default route. And now we can ping the internet. So my next step would be to just copy the IP address, enter it into a browser, and hopefully access the web interface. But that is not going to work because by default, the primary interface, so VTnet 0 or the WAN interface, is not allowed to reach any connections. So now I have to disable the Pfsense firewall. And once that is done, I can reload the page and the page displays because now the firewall is off. I log in with the username admin and the password Pfsense. And this will start the setup process. I don't need that because I already set my IP addresses, so I will just click on the top left to get out of there. And first step is to just change a password. And whenever you do changes, Pfsense reloads, and on some changes the firewall will kick back in, so then we would have to disable it. Okay, so now that is done. We now go to the WAN interface, because those two route changes, they will not persist after the next reboot. They will be missing, so we need to make a way to get them to remain. So first I go to the WAN interface, I select a static IP, I have this set, and now I can change my subnet mask to 32 over here. Click save, but I don't want to reload it yet. I also want to go to the routing section, and I want to create a default gateway. So on the WAN interface, this is my default gateway. I can now specify the IP of the gateway here, and also use it for monitoring. And then I click save. Now it tells me that the gateway doesn't lie inside the same subnet mask, so I also need to go to the advanced settings and set this checkbox here at the bottom. And now I could apply the changes, and that would basically be the first step, where we set the gateway so that Pfsense knows that any traffic going towards this IP has to go over the primary interface. What we also need is the second change, and for that we are going to the package manager, and we will be configuring the shell command, which is a small little add-on that we can use to run additional commands after Pfsense is started. But after installing that, the firewall will kick in. So I have to go back to the command line, pf control -d, and reload the page. And yeah, here it already is. Here I can enter my first command. So when Pfsense starts, to summarize it, when Pfsense starts, this will be executed first and tell Pfsense that it can reach this IP by using the VTnet 0 interface. And after that is done, the default route will kick in, which we set here, and tell that all the traffic going towards the internet has to go over this gateway. Now that is done, and we can apply the route changes. Then we can go to the WAN interface, disable the firewall, and then we can apply these changes as well. Okay, so pretty much everything is done here. I need to disable the firewall one more time. Pretty much everything is done. I will now go to the rules section, and I will, for starters, just add my IP address on the WAN interface, so I can access the web interface without having to disable the firewall. So on the WAN interface for IP version 6 TCP traffic coming from a single host or address will be allowed. Then we apply the changes. And the first time you reload, it might take a little bit to update, but if you open a private tab, you should see the page instantly. So you know the firewall rule works. But I sometimes just have to reload that page. Okay, there we go. Now the last step is to go to the start page and check if there are any updates available and install these. And this will trigger a reboot of the Pfsense shortly. Okay, as you can see, the virtual machine is back up. We still have the network connectivity. And we are whitelisted on the firewall, so we can log in. And now I am going to do basically the same and create a secondary Pfsense, and I will fast forward this whole process. All I will be changing is just using the second IP and using the different virtual MAC address. They both run on the same hypervisor, so they both have the same gateway. I will also be setting the same admin password. Okay, the virtual machine is done as well, so they are both in the same state. This is usually a good place and time to create a backup if you haven't done so. In case you want to test and revert to the backup, I highly recommend that. And we have logged in. And in the next part, we will go through setting up the carp stuff.